This is John Kelly. Kelly and his art have a habit of popping up, often with humour, sometimes small and large, in bronze, wire, but usually in paintings. He shares the surname and some of the Irish rebelliousness of another Australian icon, the bushranger Ned Kelly. This is the story of John Kelly and his art. This program was made over a 7-year period by journalist John Doggett-Williams, who interviewed the artist several times during that period. It's the second program in what is a lifelong biography of the artist.
John knows, John knows.
John Kelly holds 3 passports: Australian, British and Irish, which he says gives him a multiple cultural identity.
I was born in England, I grew up in Australia, and, you know, I'm from Anglo-Irish parents. My mother's English, my father's Irish. And in some weird sort of like piece of luck, it's entitled me to 3 separate passports. This means that legally I have 3 identities, 3 cultural identities that I can call upon as an artist.
And his work at times reflects this fragmented cultural heritage.
I have to say that I tend to make things and then take them apart. I guess it's like being a kid when you get something, you get a toy and you kind of try to work out how it works, and then it never quite goes back together in the way that you wanted to, the way it came apart.
The British and the Irish made up the rulers and the ruled in the early days of Australia's white settlement, and contained within Kelly's art and psyche are the inherent contradictions of retaining all 3.
Contradiction, I think that's what makes us all interesting. I think it was F. Scott Fitzgerald who said an artist, and I think he used this term as a bloke, so who can hold 2 contradictory thoughts at the same time and still function. And, that's what we are, or that's what I am. I am very contradictory.
Born in Bristol, but taken to Australia by his parents as a baby in 1965, it is Australian references that are central to his work. His focus on Australia remained constant even after he began living in Europe from the mid-1990s. Kelly is frequently invited to take part in exhibitions, such as this showcase of Australian art that took place in The Hague in 2007. It was opened by Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands. Kelly found inspiration in the struggles of the 1940s Australian modernists such as William Dobell, Sidney Nolan, and even the works of the fictitious poet Ern Malley. But it was Dobell's story which inspired Kelly's concentrated focus on Australian art.
William Dobell was a famous Australian painter, and the reason that he was famous was that he'd been involved in a court case in the 1940s, and that court case centred around a portrait. His painting of Joshua Smith was accused of being a caricature, and I'd read about how the court case had infected Dobell and Joshua Smith and basically destroyed their lives. My work could well be accused of being a type of caricature on the Australian landscape. So we play with this. There's a duality there that links our work in that my cow's heads are based on the Joshua Smith portrait.
As part of his research into a play he was writing about Dobell, Kelly visited several sites in New South Wales significant to the artist's life. It It was while visiting Dobell's home in Wangi that Kelly revealed a list of uncanny coincidences that, in his mind, confirmed a beyond-the-grave connection.
At the age of 30, we both won scholarships to study at the Slade School of Art. After the Slade, William Dobell exhibited at the Royal Academy of Arts, and he mistook his painting for another artist by the name of Kelly, who was from Ireland, which is kind of coincidental in that I live in Ireland, and that also after I'd studied at the Slade, I also exhibited at the RA. Also, in a recent Financial Review article, a journalist referring to my work, and he says something like that, you know, the rise in Kelly's prices has not been seen since 1963, and the rise in William Dobell's work in the auction that was known as the Shurek auction.
It was an anecdote about Dobell's brief wartime career making camouflage that led to the body of work that established Kelly's career. For a time, Dobell made oversized papier-mâché camouflage for use on an airfield. The idea was to fool Japanese bombers into thinking they were flying over a market garden.
Dobell, during his camouflage work, was based on the Menangle airfield, and as part of that he had to make a fake camouflage tree.
While visiting the now abandoned airfield, he met Nola Marcotte, who remains in the town she grew up in.
The camouflages there were at the back, and they had sentries on. All of us kids were playing there until we were chased out.
Now, from our research, we've discovered that quite a few famous Australian artists were there.
Yes, and my mother had a drawing, because she had a little tea room. They'd come down to Mum's for afternoon tea and such forth like that. And there was one, I think it might have been William Dobell.
Oh, okay.
May have been there.
Well, that's our information, is
yes,
that William Dobell was
yes,
working here.
And he used to sit with a sketchbook and do sketching.
Kelly played with the idea of Dobell's absurd camouflage and came up with his own version. It took a Herculean effort to make cow up a tree. 8 metres tall, it required 5 tonnes of bronze to complete. It became the first ever Australian sculpture to be displayed on the famous Parisian boulevard, the Champs-Élysées. Prices for his work soon skyrocketed.
$70,000 fair warning. 70,000 it is to 341.
But just like Dobell, who suffered for the success he achieved early in his career, Kelly was also to pay a price. Kelly's follow-up to his Parisian success was also the invitation that landed him in court. He was invited to make a sculpture for the 2002 International Festival of Sculpture in Monte Carlo. Three Cows in a Pile was monumental in size and effort. The 6-metre-tall sculpture required 6 tonnes of bronze.
One of 3 cows in a pile. I want them relatively smooth, possibly to look more like my paintings, that finish that I achieve in my paintings.
To cast the piece, he returned to the foundry where cow up a tree was created.
This foundry is called the Coubertin. It's in just outside of Paris, in Saint-Rémy. It's a very well-established foundry, very well equipped, and very capable of making a work of this size.
Take a walk around the Coubertin and you're bound to bump into some familiar faces. 3 Cows in a Pile was large, not just in scale, but also physically and financially. But in the lead-up to the exhibition, he fell out with the French art dealer, Stéphane Jacob, who he had previously contracted to work on the Champs-Élysées project. Kelly was sued by the Frenchman for €1 million. Kelly says it was because he refused to work with Jacob on the Monte Carlo project.
Christmas Eve 2001, I received a lawsuit in France in a language that I didn't understand, and it called me to a court where I didn't reside, in Paris. And the effects of this were quite dramatic at the beginning.
The court case became a vortex. The lawsuit claimed Jacob was Kelly's agent and that the artist had taken advantage of his connections, claims which Kelly vigorously defended. Jacob was invited to comment on this program, but declined. The court case dragged on for 5 years.
Dobell, after his court case, had a severe attack of psoriasis, which is an autoimmune skin condition, and he lost the use of a leg and an eye, and he couldn't work for a number of years. Thankfully, he recovered most of his most of the use of his leg and his eye. But incredibly, I also got an autoimmune skin disease very soon, a month after I received the lawsuit.
For a time during this period, Kelly lived in Brighton. Across the road was the park where Charles Dodson, known to the world as author Lewis Carroll, is believed to have told his niece the stories that became Alice in Wonderland. Kelly was disappearing into his own labyrinth. And it began to reflect in his work.
But my landscape was this, this strange sort of bureaucratic landscape that I just couldn't understand. And I tried to look at it as an artist looks at a landscape, a real landscape. And it is a real landscape. And I looked at it and I investigated it as if I was painting, the landscape.
But in the landscape there was a change. For the first time in several years, Kelly began painting a different animal. Kangaroos began to appear amongst the cows. The kangaroo is Australia's most famous marsupial. Our fleet-footed friend occupies a special place in the hearts and stomachs of many Australians as a corporate brand, a menu item, and a logo. Around the time Kelly was grappling with his court case, logos and corporate branding was the hot issue, following the 2001 publication of Canadian author Naomi Klein's best-selling book, No Logo.
The impact of No Logo for consumers is it was a wake-up call. People see brands, they accept them as something, just part of their everyday life. But Klein's book showed how powerful and pervasive and corrupting they were. We see 5,000 different ads every day, every single one of us. The things we see, the TV we've seen, they're sponsored by brands. Brands are an incredibly powerful part of the cultural landscape.
The subject of logos was of personal interest to John Kelly, partly because he was required to display one in relation to his Monte Carlo sculpture, that of Australia's principal arts body, the Australia Council for the Arts.
They, at one stage, gave me 10 days to sign a contract, otherwise I would lose the $5,000 that they were offering. And within that contract was the explicit instruction that I had to acknowledge their assistance. I had to use their logo.
One of the practical recommendations Klein gives in the No Logo book is to start culture jamming. And what does that mean? It means appropriate brands yourself. Turn the Nike swoosh into a swoosh-sticker. Turn different brands around, appropriate them, mess with them, mash them up, compare them, contrast them, put them in new spaces. By playing with culture and changing things, surprising people, doing surprising things, you actually wake people up from their everyday zombie existence and they start thinking.
The idea of using the kangaroo started with a comment a friend made, actually. We were talking about how the Australia Council had advised me what budget to apply for. So I put forward the budget. It's like, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they end up giving me $5,000. But their initial advice over the email was that $10,000 was a reasonable amount to apply for. So I'd applied for $10,000. They'd cut it in half. Anyway, to cut a long story short, my friend said, well, we'll ask them which half of the logo you want me to use. And I kept thinking about it, and eventually I just started drawing it, and I just kept drawing it. If it was just simply that they'd messed me about and they'd been rude to me, yeah, it wouldn't have been enough to use it. But at the same time as that they were messing me about and you know, really pissing me off, was that they had these policies and strategies that had been derived out of a report called Australians in the Arts, and it was written by Saatchi and Saatchi.
Saatchi and Saatchi found that the key challenges facing the arts community was to better communicate with the general population. They made three fundamental points in their report: that all Australians should feel welcome to be creative, that all Australians should feel welcome to enjoy the creative output of others without obstacles, and that all Australians should be proud of the arts in Australia as a realistic expression of who we are and what we value.
You know, they came out with such statements as, we don't need one central message, we need 250 messages saying the same thing. The report itself said that the Australian arts should take a look at the modern Australian cookbook. Well, what does that mean? You know, like one of the reasons I wanted to use the kangaroo was that it was a symbol that was both in the modern Australian cookbook and also fitted very nicely where in another part of the report it said the Australian arts should be down to earth and accessible.
Oh, g'day. Cooking kangaroo. Some people reckon we shouldn't be doing it. I mean, emus and kangaroos have been jumping around the edifices of Canberra for years and years, and we all salute them and say it's marvellous, so we shouldn't cook them. But why not, I say?
So I guess there was that sort of humorous thing there where here you had the Australia Council wanting to brand my cows with their logo. So, you know, there was probably a really obvious thing there. Well, why not stick a kangaroo on the arse of a cow, you know? It's sort of like, you know, there it is, bang. You know, it sort of fits together, doesn't it? I'd like to propose a toast to the Australia Council.
You were discussed in a very intimate fashion, really.
I'll propose a toast to the cameraman.
Yes, he's the cameraman.
Where's he gone?
The powerful thing about Kelly's work is that it juxtaposes often two or more contradictory terms. For the Kangaroo series, you're seeing on the one hand, you're seeing art, which is all about diversity, creativity, and on the other hand, the art's talking about brands, which are all about uniformity and consistency. And so when you see the art, you think, well, how does this work?
Within this whole project, which doesn't really have a title, but it's had 3 or 4 titles, from Australian Cultural Product, Culture Jam to, you know, paintings from the top paddock. The whole project, if you like, it had many different elements to it. It had laser cut steel drawings, paintings, you know, sculpture made out of steel and bronze. And then you also had poetry and you had letters. Culture Jam was an exhibition in 2002 in London at the Piccadilly Gallery, and it was the first exhibition where the imagery concentrated on the idea of the kangaroo and the sun. As an artist, I saw it all as one thing, you know. So if you're making a poem out of the speeches of the Australia Council for the Arts. That was as important to me as, you know, making a painting or a steel laser cut.
As you read through the report, you will find some evidence of negative or indifferent community responses. For example, it found that 35% of Australians agree that the arts are okay, but they're just irrelevant to me.
So I'd take like the Prime Minister's speech, and he'd be talking about launching the Saatchi and Saatchi report. And I just edited away everything that was superfluous to what he was saying. And I just tried to come to the crux of the points that he was making.
From the Prime Minister, the role of the arts, our love of the arts, Australians in the arts. This report by Psyche and Psyche, sick.
And I found that it formed this sort of, it self-formed this sort of type of poem which if you read it, it was a bit like a mantra.
I want Saatchi and Saatchi, the Australia Council, to mould the presentation of the arts, the content of what is produced, the way it is communicated.
And what I did is I just, emailed these poems to the Australia Council under the name...
All of them?
Every person at the Australia Council, yeah. And I made up an email, Ern Malley at Hotmail. And Ern Malley, as you know, is a famous fictitious Australian poet. So I found that quite funny that I could, make this email account.
Kelly's poetic efforts received mixed reviews from within the Australia Council.
From osco.gov.au to ernmalley@hotmail.com. Subject, Ern Malley poem, The Value of the Arts. Fuckhead, don't send me this trash, it's not clever.
And I thought, gee, how can someone, in a position at the Australia Council just speak so, outrageously, sort of like rudely to someone they don't even know?
But you're having a go at them.
Well, was it? No, am I having a go? I just quoted back to them, in a poetic form, the fact that, their statements were irreconcilable with the idea of art. And they're the Arts Council.
What's wrong with branding the arts?
Well, if you know anything about branding, and I have researched it, and, branding is about conforming to a brand identity. And as soon as you conform, as an artist, well, you're essentially sort of like, becoming an anti-artist because, you're conforming to expectations and ideals that, like the only successful countries I know to successfully brand their arts probably have been, the Soviet Union and probably Nazi Germany. Yeah.
So you're comparing the Australian arts bureaucracy to the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany?
No, I think they're a long way from those countries. But if they're going to start implementing strategies that reflect something of the historical precedents, but then they start to sort of associate themselves with that.
The Australia Council declined to be interviewed for this program. They did, however, supply written answers to several questions. They said the Australian and the Arts report was not, quote, an exercise in branding the arts per se, and that the Australia Council did not go down the path of trying to brand the arts. However, looking at the report and promotional material from the time, one could be forgiven for having gained a different impression.
Well, just before the incorrect usage, I noticed that the Australia Council had redone their website and all references to branding had been, eliminated. In its place, I noticed that they had this page called Incorrect Usage, which was how not to use their logo. I noticed that the list of things of how not to use it described perfectly the work that I'd just been doing for the previous 2 to 3 years. So I thought, well, I'll use that because this describes my show perfectly. And, the title, Incorrect Usage, was very, very important. 2005, I did an exhibition in Sydney called Australian Cultural Product, and that was an exhibition of laser-cut steel drawings where I'd did these drawings on a two-dimensional surface, just on paper, and then I had them scanned into a computer and then cut out of steel. And then after they'd, you know, originally they were going to be flat on the wall, just spray painted, so they looked like a drawing on the wall. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I was carrying one on my bicycle when it got caught in the spokes and it bent up, and it was totally bent out of shape. And at the time I was completely bent out of shape about it because I thought I'd destroyed it. But I suddenly realised that actually it was much more interesting, you know, when it started to free form itself after it had been cut. And essentially what I was trying to get to, I think, was to make a three-dimensional drawing. And so I just loved playing with this. And then I left them outside and they started to rust, and I realised they cast beautiful shadows, and you know, suddenly they opened up this sort of like little world that I could explore. And you know, I've enjoyed making those sculptures very much. The beauty of laser cutting, it's such a precise thing. It articulates in steel that line, so you can make an 8-foot drawing out of steel, which is just beautiful. I really enjoy doing that. It actually takes the drawing somewhere else. And then you cross those boundaries between drawing and sculpture. And as an artist, I found that intriguing. I make my sculptures in various places around the world now. The large bronze sculptures made in France at the Coubertin foundry. I'm working here in Ireland with the National Sculpture Factory to fabricate a large new sculpture, and I also work with Derek John in Australia, who fabricates my work, you know, the larger scale work.
So what's John like to work for?
Oh, he's good. Yeah, he sort of sets the sort of the design and leaves me to it.
The Moon Boys have a large piece. Tell us about that.
Moon Boy's 4 metres high by 3.6 metres wide, weighs about a tonne. Probably taken 6 to 7 weeks to construct. Bit of a tricky piece to make because the plate was so hard to bend. Corten's a harder, higher carbon steel and mild steel, so it's very tough. Yeah, and there's a lot of welding in it. The eyes took a lot of work, but no, it's a good piece. I'm very happy with it. Happy with the finish.
Kelly's homage to Sidney Nolan's painting Moon Boy was the inspiration for the centrepiece of his largest ever Australian sculptural exhibition at the McClellan Gallery on the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria.
That 1940s period was, well, it was an incredibly important period of painting. And Moon Boy, to me, is, you know, one of the most significant images, just in its simplicity. What look like eyes are from the Australia Council logo. You've got to kind of imagine that there's 3 kangaroos underneath that going past. What I like to call it is like an alien. So it's Moon Boy becomes an alien. Basically, you're making this strange narrative that you don't know where it goes, and it sort of all these things come into it that you can utilise. I'm not only referencing Australian history back to the 1940s, but also, you know, referencing my own work back from 10 years ago. You know, I don't like discarding anything.
Kelly retained his sense of humour throughout his kangaroo period, and his capacity for contradiction also remained intact. After years of debating the concept of branding, Kelly designed the ultimate Australian logo, a beer label.
The beer is fantastic, fantastic beer to drink, and they gave me plenty of it when I was down there. I understand it won a couple of gold medals for the packaging awards, the beer awards I think they're called. I've kind of completed the Saatchi and Saatchi report. I've followed their advice, haven't I? You know, I've just done what they said to do, and it's worked out. You know, it's great. I got a fantastic commission out of it. So what you know, I think being critical of people who are in powerful positions, I think it should only be encouraged, because you know, there's you know, people can enjoy it, and it can be.
What happened at the end with the court case? It's in the past now?
Court case is finished. We won the first case 100%, and then strangely enough, in the appeal, under Napoleonic law you have the right of appeal. The appeals court found that I was guilty of parasitism and denigration, and I think that'll probably form the next part of my work, because I like the idea of artists as parasite, and it could actually be my greatest achievement as an artist to actually have been parasitical upon an art dealer.
What I admire about John Quelle is his ability to make serious art which raises a smile. He walked in with this folio, and I think it was love at first sight.
See you later.